In the sun-baked grasslands of the Llano Estacado, where the horizon stretches endlessly like a sea of golden waves, lives a solitary Comanche widow whose hands can read the earth as clearly as others read books. Numunu, warrior blood, runs through Taabe Nashoba's veins, but to the settlers who trade at her modest farm, she's merely a quiet woman who raises exceptional horses and keeps to herself. Yet beneath her reserved demeanor and weathered hands lies a terrifying truth. Those who threaten what is hers will face a hunter who can track a single horsehair across 50 miles of windswept plains, who can move like a ghost through territory others find impassable, and who learned from birth that justice comes not from courts, but from skill, patience, and unflinching resolve. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The merciless summer sun beats down on the rolling plains, casting sharp shadows across Taab's weathered farmhouse. At 46, she moves with the fluid economy of someone who wastes nothing. Not water, not words, not motion. Her copper skin bears the fine lines earned through years under the unforgiving Texas sky, while her dark hair, now threaded with silver at the temples, remains tightly braided and practical. Those who know only her quiet presence at the trading post would never guess this woman once rode with the most feared Comanche warband of the southern plains, or that territorial rangers still speak in hushed tones of the tracker called Wind. Sister, the one who follows trails others cannot see. Taabe kneels beside the split-rail fence that borders her small horse pasture, her fingers working methodically to repair a broken section. The movements are precise and efficient, each twist of wire and placement of wood revealing years of self-reliance. Her modest farmstead sits in a shallow valley where an underground spring provides reliable water even in the harshest droughts. The main house is simple but sturdy, built partially into a hillside in the traditional manner that keeps it cool in summer and warm in winter. A larger barn houses her prized horses, while outbuildings contain the tools and supplies necessary for her solitary existence. To casual visitors, including the occasional traders, government agents, and neighboring settlers, the farm appears unremarkable. A modest homestead maintained by a hard-working widow of mixed heritage, who somehow manages to breed the finest horses in 3 counties. What these visitors don't notice is how the buildings are positioned to provide clear sightlines in all directions. How natural features of the landscape have been subtly enhanced to create defensive positions. How Taabe's daily routines, seemingly random, actually allow her to monitor the surrounding territory with practiced vigilance. The sound of approaching hoofbeats draws her attention, though her hands never pause in their work. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's despite the years, identify the rider long before most would make out more than a distant speck on the horizon. Thomas Running Fox, the 23-year-old grandson of Elder Joseph Running Fox from the nearby settlement of Painted Creek, approaches on his dappled mare. Thomas serves as an occasional messenger between Taabe's isolated farm and the mixed community of Comanche families and sympathetic settlers who have established an uneasy peace in this contested territory. Grandmother sends her respects, Thomas calls as he dismounts, using the traditional term of respect for an elder woman rather than indicating actual relation. He carries a small bundle wrapped in cotton cloth. She sends the medicines you requested and asks that you visit soon. There are matters the council wishes to discuss, Taabe nods, her expression revealing nothing of the immediate calculations happening behind her calm exterior. Elder Running Fox's wife wouldn't send such a message without serious cause. Tell her I will come when the moon is full, she responds, her voice carrying a distinctive quality, soft yet somehow cutting through the prairie wind with perfect clarity. It's a voice that requires listeners to lean in slightly, to pay attention, to focus on her words rather than their own thoughts. Thomas shifts uncomfortably, glancing around the farmstead before continuing. There have been strangers asking questions at Jackson's trading post, white men with expensive boots and cheap manners. They've been inquiring about water rights and property boundaries, particularly around the North Fork of the river. While continuing her fence repair, Taabe processes this information against patterns she has observed in recent weeks. Unusual dust clouds beyond the northern ridge, suggesting multiple riders moving with purpose rather than the random patterns of travelers or hunters. Strange tracks near her spring that indicated men on foot measuring distances. The nervous behavior of wildlife suggesting unfamiliar human presence in the territory. "What else?" she asks, knowing Thomas hasn't delivered his full message. They've been asking specifically about isolated farms, about who lives alone. His voice trails off, the implication clear. In these territories, those without the protection of numbers have always been considered vulnerable targets by those with predatory intentions. "I see," Taabe responds, her hands momentarily stilling on the fence wire. "Has Elder Running Fox spoken with the territorial rangers?" Thomas's bitter laugh tells her everything. Ranger MacDonald said they're stretched thin, dealing with actual crimes rather than Indian suspicions. Said we should be grateful they bother responding to any of our complaints at all. The deliberate slight from the territorial authorities doesn't surprise Taabe. Despite treaties and promises, the protection of law has always been selectively applied in these borderlands. What concerns her more is the pattern emerging: strangers with interest in water rights, in property boundaries, in isolated homesteads. The tactics are familiar from the early days of settlement encroachment on Comanche territories. "Thank your grandmother for her warning," Taabe says, returning to her methodical fence repair. "Tell her I will come prepared," as Thomas prepares to depart. Taabe's attention shifts briefly to the northern horizon. To most eyes, it would appear empty, just the endless rolling grassland that characterizes this region. But her trained vision catches the faint smudge of dust miles away, too concentrated for natural wind patterns, too persistent for wild game. Riders, moving with purpose, staying just beyond the range where most would notice their presence. After Thomas leaves, Taabe completes the fence repair with unhurried precision. Her movements remain calm and methodical, giving no indication that her mind now works with the focused intensity that once made her the most valued tracker among her people. She walks toward her modest farmhouse, her path taking her past key observation points where she can survey the surrounding territory without appearing to do so. Inside the main room of her home, Taabe moves to a hand-carved cedar chest positioned beneath the east-facing window. The placement appears decorative, but actually allows her to monitor the approach from the trading post while accessing essential supplies. The room itself reveals a woman of practical habits, functional furniture built for durability rather than ornamentation, walls adorned with useful items rather than decorations. A central hearth that serves for both cooking and warmth. What visitors wouldn't recognize is how every element serves dual purposes. The heavy oak table positioned to create a barrier between the door and the sleeping area. The seemingly decorative blanket hanging on the wall that conceals a narrow passage to the root cellar and an emergency exit. The arrangement of river stones beside the hearth that could become projectiles if needed. 7 years of peaceful existence haven't dulled Taabe's instinct for survival in a territory where peace has always been temporary. From the cedar chest, she removes a small package wrapped in deerskin and sealed with beeswax. Inside lies a knife of exceptional quality, its blade bearing distinctive markings that identify it as the work of Iron Wolf, the legendary Comanche weaponsmith who had been her father's brother. The knife hasn't been used in 7 years, not since Taabe chose a different path, following the ambush that claimed her husband's life and left her as the sole survivor of an attack that territorial authorities had dismissed as unfortunate conflict. With hostile natives, despite all victims being Comanche farmers with legal land claims, the memory rises unbidden. 7 years earlier, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Taabe and her husband, Evening Star, had been returning from the Territorial Land Office with the precious papers confirming their legal ownership of the spring-fed valley. Documents that should have protected them from the constant encroachment attempts. 3 other Comanche families had traveled with them, all part of the community's careful strategy to secure their ancestral lands through the white man's legal system. The ambush came in the narrow pass, just beyond Broken Skull Ridge. 12 riders with faces concealed by bandanas, but with the distinctive silver spurs and custom saddles that identified them as men who worked for Colonel Harlan Blackwood, the cattle baron who had been systematically acquiring water rights throughout the territory by any means necessary. The attack was executed with cold efficiency. No demands, no warnings, just immediate gunfire concentrated on the men of the party. Evening Star had died pushing Taabe from her horse into the protective cover of a ravine, his body shielding her from the initial volley. The others had fallen quickly, caught in the open with minimal cover, only Taabe, concealed in the ravine, and presumed dead or fled, had survived to witness the attackers methodically collecting the land documents from the bodies before disappearing into the vast grasslands. The territorial rangers had conducted a perfunctory investigation concluding that unknown parties, possibly hostile Comanche from beyond the settlement boundaries, had conducted the attack. No evidence connecting Blackwood's men to the massacre was officially acknowledged, despite the distinctive tracks Taabe had documented, despite the witnesses who had seen Blackwood's riders in the vicinity, despite the clear motive centered on the newly secured water rights. In the aftermath, faced with a justice system that offered no recourse, Taabe had made a choice. Rather than seeking the traditional Comanche revenge that would have ignited a larger conflict endangering the entire settlement, she had withdrawn to her farm, focusing on rebuilding a life of quiet self-sufficiency. She had packed away Winchester, the tracker whose skills had once been legendary among her people, becoming instead the widowed Taabe who bred exceptional horses and kept to herself. That decision had brought 7 years of relative peace. But as she holds her uncle's knife, feeling its perfect balance and deadly potential, Taabe acknowledges what she has always known. Winchester never truly disappeared. The skills that once made her the most feared tracker of the southern plains remained sharp through daily practices disguised as ordinary farm routines. The awareness that once allowed her to read landscapes like written pages continued in her. Careful observation of territorial patterns, the strategic mind that once guided war parties through seemingly impossible terrain, remained active in her constant assessment of threats and opportunities. The sound of the wind chimes hanging from her porch rafters shifts subtly, indicating a change in the air currents. To most, it would be meaningless, but to Taabe it signals approaching riders from the east, not the path Thomas would take returning to the settlement, but the direction of Jackson's trading post. Moving with unhurried purpose, she returns, the knife to its hiding place, then positions herself at her work Babel, where she appears to be sorting medicinal herbs gathered from the surrounding plains. Through the eastern window, she observes 3 riders approaching her farm. Their posture and equipment immediately identify them as not from the local settlements, expensive eastern saddles rather than the practical western style used by ranchers. Pristine boots unmarked by the realities of prairie work, clothes too clean and pressed for men who had spent significant time on the trail. Most telling is how they carry themselves, the artificial casualness of men attempting to appear at ease in territory where they don't belong. The lead rider, a tall man with a carefully trimmed beard and a city man's hat, directs the others with subtle hand gestures that suggest military or law enforcement background. They approach the farmhouse in a pattern that allows maximum surveillance of the property while maintaining group protection, not the approach of friendly visitors or honest businessmen. Taabe continues sorting herbs with methodical precision, her movements unhurried and focused, despite her assessment of the approaching threat. By the time the riders reach her front yard, she has catalogued every detail of their appearance, equipment, and tactical positioning. She has noted the bulge of concealed weapons beneath their too fine jackets, the way they position themselves to maintain clear firing lines, the practiced ease with which they survey potential threats and escape routes. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the lead rider calls, his voice carrying that particular quality of forced friendliness that masks calculated purpose. "Might we trouble you for some water for our horses? Been a long ride from Sweetwater," the reference to Sweetwater, a town in the opposite direction from their approach, confirms Taabe's assessment of deception. She straightens from her work babel, presenting the appearance of a simple farm woman while maintaining perfect awareness of each rider's position, distance to potential weapons, and available cover. "The pump is by the barn," she responds, her voice neutral. "Help yourselves." The lead rider dismounts with fluid grace that further suggests formal training rather than the practical experience of a rancher or farmer. "Much obliged. Name's James Wilson. These are my associates, Mr. Hayes and Mr. Carter. We represent certain business interests looking to develop this region, bring some civilization to these wild parts." Taabe notes how the other two men remain, mounted, positioned to maintain clear firing positions toward both her and potential approach routes to the farm. Not the behavior of legitimate businessmen seeking water. "This region has its own civilization," she responds, her statement simple but carrying unmistakable boundary. "Has for thousands of years." Wilson's smile remains fixed, though his eyes sharpen with reassessment. Indeed, the native heritage is part of what makes these territories so fascinating. But progress comes for us all, doesn't it? He gestures around her modest farmstead. "You've got quite a nice little operation here, especially for a woman on her own. Must be challenging to maintain without a man's help. The company I represent might be interested in making you a generous offer for this property. Save you the hardship of managing alone." The implied threat beneath the polite offer hangs in the air between them. Taabe has heard variations of this approach throughout her life. The assumption that her land must be available simply because they want it. The suggestion that a woman, particularly a Comanche woman, couldn't possibly defend what is hers. The thin veneer of business legitimacy covering the underlying methods of acquisition through intimidation. "This land is not for sale," she states simply, her voice carrying that distinctive quality that, despite its softness, somehow fills the space between them with unmistakable authority. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Wilson's expression shifts, the artificial friendliness giving way to cooler assessment. "Everyone has a price, Mrs. Nashoba," she supplies. "And you're mistaken. Some things remain beyond price." A subtle tension ripples through Wilson's posture, a micro-expression of annoyance quickly controlled. "Well, Mrs. Nashoba, I hope you'll reconsider. The offer won't remain open indefinitely. Development is coming to this territory whether individual stakeholders choose to participate willingly or not." As the men water their horses, maintaining their tactical positions despite the pretense of casual business discussion, Taabe observes every detail with the practiced eye of a tracker reading sign. The way haze continually scans the property perimeter, assessing defensive weaknesses. How Carter focuses on her barn and stock pens, evaluating their quality and value. The subtle hand signals Wilson uses to direct their movements without verbal communication. When they depart, Taabe watches them until they disappear over the eastern rise. Only then does she allow her posture to shift from neutral observation to active preparation. The visit confirms what Thomas's warning had suggested. Organized, professional pressure on isolated landholders, targeting properties with water, access. The methods are familiar from past territorial conflicts, but the implementation shows unusual sophistication. Moving with deliberate purpose, Taabe begins preparation for a journey. From beneath floorboards concealed by a seemingly permanent work babel, she retrieves items unused for 7 years. Tracking tools designed for night travel, signaling equipment that operates beyond normal visual and auditory range, survival gear that would allow her to move through the harshest conditions undetected and self-sufficient. Most significant is a small wooden box, its surface carved with symbols meaningful only to those trained in the old ways. Inside lies a small pouch of pigments, earth tones, that once applied in specific patterns would transform a tracker into a living shadow within the landscape. Beside it rests a necklace of carved bone and specialized stones that traditional Comanche scouts wore concealed beneath their clothing, identifying them to allies when disguised for tracking operations. Taabe holds the necklace momentarily, feeling its weight like a memory given physical form. Then, with ceremonial deliberation, she places it around her neck, tucking it beneath her clothing where it rests against her skin, like a part of herself returned after long absence. 7 years ago, when the territorial justice system failed, her family and community, Taabe, had made the difficult choice to set aside Winchester in favor of a path that wouldn't escalate the conflict. She had chosen a future of isolated peace over a past of righteous vengeance. That choice had brought years of relative security for both herself and the fragile Comanche settlement at Painted Creek. Now, as strange men with hidden purposes threaten that hard-won peace, Taabe acknowledges the reality she has perhaps always known. Sometimes protection requires more than patience and paperwork. Sometimes survival demands the skills she was born to wield, the abilities passed through generations of warriors in her bloodline, the particular talents that once made. Territorial authorities speak the name Wind Sister with equal measures of respect and fear. As twilight settles across the plains, casting long shadows across her farmstead, Taabe Nashoba completes her preparations with the focused intensity of someone reclaiming an essential part of herself. Tomorrow, she will ride to the Painted Creek settlement as promised, but tonight she has different work. Tonight, she will move as her ancestors did, invisible across landscapes others find impenetrable, reading signs others cannot see, tracking movements others believe untraceable. Tonight, Winchester returns to the shadows, not as a creature of vengeance, but as something both more ancient and more necessary, protector of her people, guardian of their water, defender of the land that holds the bones of her husband and the future of her community. As Taabe slips into the gathering darkness, the night birds fall momentarily silent, recognizing a hunter returning to her element. 7 years of peace have not dulled her skills, but sharpened her purpose. The strangers who threaten what is hers are about to discover why the old stories say you can hide from many things in these vast plains, from the law, from civilization, from your past mistakes. But you cannot hide from Winchester once. She has your scent. The full moon illuminates the rolling landscape as Taabe approaches the settlement of Painted Creek. Unlike her daytime persona who rides openly along established trails, tonight she moves like water, finding the spaces between stones, her progress silent and nearly invisible despite the moonlight. She has spent the night tracking the movements of Wilson and his men, following their trail to a sprawling camp hidden in a secluded valley 10 miles north of her farm. What she discovered there transformed her concern into cold certainty. 28. Men, 12 supply wagons, heavy equipment disguised under canvas covers, surveying tools, blasting powder, armed guards positioned with tactical precision. This was no simple land speculation operation, but something far more organized and dangerous. Most telling had been the surveyor's maps she glimpsed from her concealed position, detailed renderings of the underground spring systems that feed both her farm and the Painted Creek settlement, with particular attention to the narrow canyon where the waters surface. Painted Creek emerges from the darkness as Tabe approaches, a collection of structures that balance Comanche traditions with adaptations to changing times. Unlike many forced settlements, this community has managed to maintain sovereignty through a combination of legal maneuvering, strategic alliances with sympathetic settlers, and careful stewardship of its most precious resource, the creek, from which it takes its name, whose waters flow year-round, even in the harshest droughts. The settlement follows the traditional circular arrangement, with the central council house surrounded by family dwellings that expand outward according to relationship and function. Newer buildings constructed of timber and stone stand alongside traditional brush arbors and earth lodges. Gardens flourish in the fertile soil near the creek banks, while corrals hold horses that represent both practical transportation and the community's primary economic resource. As she approaches the council house, Tabe shifts her bearing to match her public identity, the reserved widow rather than the night tracker. She adjusts her clothing, ensuring the tracking paint she applied for night movement is concealed beneath her practical riding clothes. The bone necklace remains against her skin, hidden from view but reconnecting her to generations of protectors who came before. Elder Joseph Running Fox awaits her arrival, his weathered face revealing both his 92 years of life experience and the sharp intelligence that has helped guide the community through decades of transition and threat. Beside him sits his wife, Morning Light, whose knowledge of traditional medicine and quiet diplomatic skills have made her the community's spiritual center. Despite the late hour, several other community leaders have gathered, their expressions revealing the seriousness of the situation. "Wind Sister returns to us," Elder Running Fox says quietly, using her tracker name rather than her public identity, an acknowledgement that reaches beyond mere words to recognize the transformation she has undergone. "You have seen something in the night." Tabe nods, accepting both the recognition and the responsibility it carries. 28 men camped in Shadow Valley, armed and equipped for more than simple surveying. They have detailed maps of our water systems, blasting powder, and equipment for damming operations. She produces a small leather notebook, opening it to reveal detailed sketches of the camp layout, equipment positioning, and defensive arrangements. The precision of her documentation, completed in near darkness while maintaining perfect concealment, and demonstrates skills far beyond casual observation. Their leader is not the man who visited my farm. He remains at the camp, a tall man with military bearing, who the others address as Colonel. They deferred to his authority with the discipline of hired guns rather than business associates. Elder Running Fox exchanges glances with Morning Light, their unspoken communication reflecting decades of partnership in community leadership. "Blackwood," Morning Light says, naming the spectre that has haunted their community since the massacre 7 years earlier. "Colonel Harland Blackwood," Elder Running Fox confirms for the others present, the same man whose hired guns murdered Evening Star and the others when they returned with their land patents. The territorial courts dismissed the evidence then, claiming insufficient proof despite Winchester's tracking report. The name hangs in the air between them, carrying the weight of unpunished crimes and justice long denied. For Taabe, it triggers memories she has compartmentalized but never forgotten. Her husband's last breath as he shielded her from gunfire, the methodical way Blackwood's men had collected the legal documents from the dead, the territorial authorities. Deliberate blindness to evidence that implicated a powerful land baron. "He wants the water," says Calvin Trueshield, who serves as the settlement's representative in territorial matters. A man in his 50s who wears traditional braids alongside the white man's suit, Calvin has navigated the dangerous waters of territorial politics for decades. The new railroad spur to Fort Davis will need water sources. Whoever controls the underground springs can name their price to the railroad company. "Not just the water," Taabe responds, her quiet voice drawing them closer to hear her words. "The southern passage as well." The maps in their camp marked our canyon as the optimal route for the rail line, a natural corridor through hills that would otherwise require extensive blasting and construction. This information shifts the gathering's energy. The threat, expanding beyond water rights to the very existence of their settlement, which sits directly in the path of the proposed railway corridor. What had seemed a dispute over resources now reveals itself as potential erasure, the familiar pattern of progress consuming indigenous communities in its path. "We have legal title to these lands," Calvin Trueshield argues, though his expression reveals doubt beneath his words. "The territorial government recognized our claims 5 years ago. The treaty protections may be limited, but our water rights are documented and filed." Taabe meets his gaze directly. "As were the patent's Evening Star and the others carried when Blackwood's men killed them. Papers offer poor protection against bullets." The harsh truth silences momentary optimism. Legal ownership has never provided true security for indigenous communities when powerful interests set their sights on valuable resources. The territorial courts have consistently favored development interests over treaty rights, finding technicalities and exceptions whenever necessary to advance what they call progress. "What do you propose, Winchester?" Elder Running Fox asks, the question acknowledging her transition from observer to active participant in the community's defense. Taabe considers, her response carefully balancing strategic assessment with respect for the council's authority. Blackwood believes he faces isolated farmers and a small settlement with minimal defenses. His strategy depends on overwhelming force against targets he considers vulnerable and uncoordinated. She moves to the central fire, where embers provide both light and focus for the gathering. With a slender stick, she begins sketching in the earth, a tactical map that integrates landscape features with defensive positions. We cannot match his numbers or weapons directly, but the advantage of the hunter is not in strength, but in knowledge of terrain, of timing, of the prey's patterns and weaknesses. As the council discussion continues into the night, Taabe's tactical experience merges with the community's collective wisdom. Unlike her previous role as a solitary tracker, she now helps shape a coordinated defense strategy that leverages each community member's strengths. Young riders with the fastest horses will carry messages between scattered allies throughout the territory. Elders with detailed knowledge of hidden water sources will ensure the community maintains access even if main channels are blocked. Families with young children will establish temporary camps in concealed locations away from likely conflict points. Most critical is the creation of a surveillance network that extends Taabe's tracking capabilities across a wider territory. She selects 10 community members with the strongest wilderness skills, primarily young adults who combine traditional knowledge with adaptability to new challenges. Through the remaining hours of darkness, She provides accelerated instruction in the specialized tracking and concealment techniques that made Windsister legendary. Movement without disturbance, she demonstrates, showing how to place each footstep so that grasses spring back without revealing passage, breathing with the wind rather than against it, reading shadow patterns to identify watching eyes. Miguel Two Ravens, a 19-year-old with exceptional horsemanship and keen eyesight, absorbs her instruction with particular intensity. "My father spoke of your tracking skills," he tells her during a brief rest. "He said you could follow a butterfly's path 3 days after it passed." Taabe acknowledges this with the subtle humor that occasionally emerges through her reserved exterior. Only if the butterfly was particularly heavy. As dawn approaches, the community has established preliminary defenses and communication networks. Taabe prepares to return to her farm, knowing her continued presence in Painted Creek would alert Blackwood's scouts to connections between the supposedly isolated widow and the larger community. Before she departs, Morning Light approaches with a small leather pouch. The elder woman's gentle hands belie her strength as she presses the medicine bundle into Taabe's palm. "You walk a difficult path, daughter of many brave mothers," she says, her voice carrying the weight of traditional authority. "The path between justice and vengeance, between the protector and the warrior. This medicine will help you see clearly when darkness threatens your vision." Taabe accepts the bundle with appropriate reverence. "My eyes remain clear, honored mother." Morning Light's wise gaze sees beyond Taabe's composed exterior. Not all darkness is external. The shadows of grief can blind even the sharpest eyes. Evening Star would not wish his memory to become a blade that cuts the one who carries it. The unexpected reference to her husband opens something vulnerable beneath Taabe's carefully maintained composure. For a moment, the mask of Windsister slips, revealing the woman who has carried her grief in private discipline for 7 years. "I have not forgotten the difference between protection and revenge," she responds quietly. "One serves the living, the other serves only the dead." Morning Light nods with approval. "Remember this distinction in the days ahead. Blackwood and his men bring darkness, but you carry light from ancestors who understood that survival sometimes requires terrible strength used with perfect discipline." As Taabe rides away from Painted Creek, taking an indirect route that would confuse any watching eyes, the eastern horizon brightens with approaching dawn. She adjusts her path to utilize natural features that provide concealment: shallow arroyos, stands of mesquite, the long shadows of rock formations that obscure her silhouette against the lightening sky. 3 miles from her farm, she detects subtle signs that alert her trained awareness: disturbed gravel at a stream crossing, bent grass stems showing passage within the past few hours, the distant agitation of prairie birds indicating human presence where there should be none. Someone has visited her property during her absence. Rather than approaching directly, Taabe circles wide, establishing a concealed observation position that provides clear sightlines to her farmstead. Through the rising morning mist, she confirms her suspicion: 2 riders maintaining surveillance from the ridge opposite her house, their position selected for optimal observation while remaining beyond normal detection range. The distinctive saddle gear identifies them as Blackwood's men, likely monitoring her movements to assess potential resistance to their operations. The tactical situation clarifies in her mind with cold precision. Blackwood has already begun mapping resistance points, identifying individuals who might challenge his plans. Her farm's strategic location, controlling a key water access point, has made her an early target for surveillance and likely intimidation. Taabe weighs her options with the calculated assessment that once made her the most valued tactical advisor among her people. Direct confrontation would reveal capabilities she needs to keep hidden until more critical moments. Attempting to evade the watchers might succeed short-term, but would alert them to her awareness of their presence. The most effective approach combines apparent normalcy with controlled information management, appearing to be exactly what they expect while gathering intelligence they don't realize she possesses. She approaches her farm along the main trail, her posture and pace matching what would be expected of a woman returning from a community visit, neither hurried nor particularly vigilant. Nothing in her bearing reveals her awareness of the watching eyes or the night's activities. She tends to her horses, maintains her garden, and performs the routine tasks of farm maintenance with practiced consistency that reveals nothing of her heightened tactical alertness. Through subtle observation techniques developed over decades of tracking, she monitors the watchers without appearing to notice their presence. Their position, equipment, patrol timing, and communication patterns all provide valuable intelligence about Blackwood's larger operation. Most telling is their discipline. These aren't common ranch hands pressed into surveillance duty, but men with formal training, likely former military or experienced hired guns accustomed to extended field operations. By midday, the surveillance team is replaced by two different riders who maintain the same observation position. Confirmation that Blackwood has established rotating watches rather than casual monitoring. The systematic approach suggests an operation timeline measured in days rather than weeks, with resources already committed to comprehensive preparation rather than preliminary assessment. As Tabe works in her garden, apparently focused on practical farming tasks, her mind calculates response strategies with cool efficiency. Blackwood's operation demonstrates sophisticated planning, substantial resources, and professional implementation, far exceeding typical land-grabbing tactics previously encountered in territorial disputes. The integration of surveying operations, armed security, and targeted intelligence gathering indicates preparation for substantial development rather than speculative acquisition. The distant sound of approaching riders draws her attention, though nothing in her movements reveals this. Awareness. She continues harvesting vegetables, her body language projecting absorbed concentration in her task, while her senses identify multiple horses approaching from the direction of Jackson's trading post, the expected direction for legitimate visitors rather than the concealed approach Blackwood's surveillance team had used. 4 riders appear on the main trail, their approach neither concealed nor particularly threatening. Tabe recognizes Jackson himself, the trading post owner who maintains carefully neutral relationships with all communities in the territory. Beside him rides Sarah Colton, the schoolteacher from the white settlement at Meridian Crossing, whose unusual friendship with Tabe has developed through shared interest in botanical knowledge. The other 2 riders are unfamiliar, their clothing and bearing suggesting government officials rather than local residents. Tabe straightens from her garden work, presenting the appropriate response to approaching visitors, while maintaining tactical awareness of the surveillance team still hidden on the distant ridge. The visitors' timing and composition suggest information delivery rather than immediate threat, though experience has taught her that government representatives rarely bring favorable developments for Comanche landholders. Mrs. Neshoba, Jackson, calls as they approach, his forced heartiness revealing discomfort beneath his friendly greeting. "Hope we're not disturbing your day. These gentlemen are from the Territorial Land Office and asked to speak with property holders in this region." The taller of the 2 officials dismounts with the awkward movements of a man who rides by necessity rather than choice. His formal suit, despite adaptations for travel, marks him as someone who normally operates in government offices rather than rural territories. "Mrs. Neshoba, I'm Walter Green, Assistant Director of the Territorial Land Management Office." He introduces himself with administrative precision. This is my colleague, Mr. Simmons from the Railway Commission. We're conducting an informational tour regarding potential infrastructure developments in this region. Tabe acknowledges the introduction with a measured nod, her expression revealing nothing of the tactical assessment occurring behind her composed exterior. The official presence confirms her earlier intelligence. Blackwood's operation has advanced to formal implementation stages, with government authorities already involved in preliminary notifications. The territorial governor has approved preliminary surveys for potential railway expansion through this region. Green continues, producing official-looking documents bearing government seals. Under territorial statutes, all property holders must be informed of potential eminent domain considerations. Should survey results indicate optimal routing through existing settlements or private holdings. The carefully constructed bureaucratic language doesn't disguise the underlying message: preparation for legal seizure of lands deemed necessary for railway development, with compensation determined by government assessments rather than owner consent. It's a familiar pattern in territorial expansion, where indigenous land rights consistently yield to development interests, regardless of legal documentation or prior agreements. These notifications are purely informational at this stage, Green adds, with administrative detachment that ignores the human implications of his words. No final determinations have been made regarding specific routing or property impacts. Sarah Colton watches this exchange with the sharp observation of an educated woman who has witnessed similar processes unfold in other territories. Her friendship with Tabe has developed in part through shared understanding of how progress typically advances across indigenous lands regardless of legal protections or formal titles. Interestingly, Colonel Blackwood's representatives have been discussing very specific routing plans with merchants in Meridian Crossing. Sarah interjects, her direct approach contrasting with Green's bureaucratic vagueness. They've been showing maps with detailed railway corridors that appear to run directly through both Painted Creek Settlement and several independent farms in this region. Green's expression tightens at this information, revealing the gap between official procedures and actual implementation. The Railway Commission has not authorized publication of specific planning documents at this stage, he responds with bureaucratic reflex. Any representations by private interests regarding definitive routing decisions would be premature and unauthorized. Yet Blackwood Construction has already established a substantial base camp and begun preliminary surveying operations, Sarah counters, demonstrating information networks that extend beyond what government officials might expect from a frontier schoolteacher. Their representatives have told merchants in Meridian Crossing to prepare for significant construction traffic beginning within the month. This exchange provides Tabe with critical confirmation. The accelerated timeline she observed in Blackwood's camp preparations matches his representations to commercial interests in the white settlement. The official notification process lags behind actual implementation, suggesting coordination between development interests and government authorities that bypasses formal procedures and community consultation. Throughout this revelation, Tabe maintains her composed exterior while absorbing every nuance of the unfolding situation. The surveillance team on the distant ridge, the government officials with their carefully worded notifications, Sarah's intelligence from Meridian Crossing, all pieces fitting into a tactical picture that clarifies Blackwood's strategy and timeline. As the officials prepare to depart, having delivered their informational notices with bureaucratic detachment, Sarah arranges to remain behind. Her request to discuss botanical specimens, providing plausible cover for continued conversation, away from official ears. Jackson and the officials continue their circuit of notifications, leaving the two women alone except for the distant watchers whose presence Taabe has not acknowledged. Once the official party moves beyond earshot, Sarah's manner shifts from polite educator to focused ally. Blackwood has brought in over 50 men, Taabe, not just surveyors and construction workers, armed men with military experience. The merchants in Meridian Crossing have been told to expect hundreds more within 2 weeks. Taabe absorbs this information with outward calm that conceals rapid tactical calculation. Has he secured the territorial contracts officially? Not. Yet according to courthouse records I reviewed yesterday. But Judge Harmon has scheduled an unusual closed session of the Territorial Commission for tomorrow. Unusual because 3 commissioners traveled overnight to attend on very short notice. This detail sharpens Taabe's assessment. Judge Harmon's court has consistently favored development interests over indigenous land rights, finding technical exceptions to treaty protections whenever substantial profits beckoned. A special session called with unusual urgency suggests imminent official approval rather than standard procedural review. There's more, Sarah continues, her voice lowering despite the distance from potential listeners. Blackwood's men have been asking specific questions about you at the trading post, about your history before settling here, about your connection to the Comanche bands further west, about skills beyond horse breeding. This targeted intelligence gathering confirms what Taabe had suspected. Blackwood's operation includes specific assessment of potential resistance beyond general property documentation. The questions about her history suggest someone may have recognized connections between the widow Nashoba and the tracker once known as Wind Sister. As Sarah departs with promises to continue gathering information within Meridian Crossing, Taabe returns to her farm routines with outward serenity that disguises the tactical network now activating throughout her awareness. Blackwood's operation has advanced beyond speculation to implementation, with government complicity providing official cover for what amounts to legalized land seizure. The accelerated timeline requires immediate response rather than gradual preparation. From her cabin's eastern window, Taabe observes the distant surveillance team being replaced by new watchers as afternoon fades toward evening. Further confirmation of systematic monitoring rather than casual observation. The disciplined rotation suggests professional security operations designed to track movements, identify resistance networks, and document potential opposition before main operations commence. As darkness approaches, Taabe completes her visible farm activities with practiced normalcy, creating the appearance of routine evening preparations, securing livestock, storing equipment, preparing simple meals. Nothing in her movements would alert observers to her actual intentions or heightened situational awareness. Only when full darkness provides concealment does she access the hidden preparations established during previous nights. Specialized equipment for extended tracking operations, communication tools that function beyond conventional methods, supplies that would support independent movement through territory others would find impassable. 7 years of peace have presented. Taabe, with clear choice, continue as the widow who accepts circumstances beyond her control, or reclaim her full identity as Wind Sister, the tracker whose skills once made her both protector and legend among her people. Blackwood's operation, with its combination of corporate power, government complicity, and professional implementation, threatens not just her farm, but the entire community's existence. The night wind carries scents from miles away as Taabe prepares for movement beyond what Blackwood's watchers could anticipate. Unlike the previous night's reconnaissance, tonight she will begin systematic counter-operations, not merely gathering intelligence, but establishing the foundation for resistance that utilizes her specialized skills against an adversary whose strength lies in conventional power rather than adaptive knowledge. As she slips into the darkness, using routes invisible to distant watchers, Taabe Nashoba completes the transformation begun when she first recognized the threat pattern emerging around her peaceful existence. Winchester returns fully to the shadows, carrying generations of tracking wisdom combined with 7 years of focused purpose. Blackwood and his operation represent familiar forces in new forms. The relentless encroachment that has pushed her people from territory to territory, the systematic erasure disguised as progress, the legal machinery that transforms theft into legitimate acquisition. What Blackwood cannot know, as his watchers report only routine farm activities from a solitary widow, is that he now faces an adversary whose skills were born from centuries of survival against overwhelming force. The hunters who have come to claim what is not theirs are about to discover they have themselves become the hunted. Their movements tracked, their vulnerabilities mapped, their strategies countered by methods beyond their comprehension. The Rustlers, who believe they face only a Comanche widow with a modest farm, are about to encounter Winchester, she who tracks without rest, who moves without trace, who turns strength into vulnerability and territory into trap. As Taabe disappears into the night landscape, her purpose crystallizes with perfect clarity. Not vengeance for past losses, but protection for living futures. Not just personal defense, but community survival. In the darkness, Winchester begins her hunt. The first rustling attempt comes 3 nights later, earlier than Taabe had anticipated, but precisely according to the pattern she had predicted. The moon hangs like a sliver of bone in the night sky, providing just enough illumination for those who know how to use it, while keeping others blind to the landscape's secrets. 6 riders approach her farm from the northwest, taking advantage of a shallow ravine that provides concealment from casual observation. Their movement shows professional discipline, maintaining appropriate spacing, minimizing silhouettes against the skyline, coordinating advances with hand signals rather than verbal communication. These aren't common thieves, but organized. Operators with tactical training, but Winchester is already 3 steps ahead. From her concealed position in the juniper stand overlooking her corral, Taabe observes their approach with clinical precision. She has spent the past 2 days preparing for exactly this scenario, though she betrayed nothing of these preparations to the watchers who maintained surveillance of her farm. While appearing to conduct routine activities, tending gardens, repairing fences, caring for her prized horses, she had methodically transformed her property into terrain that would reveal everything while appearing to conceal nothing. Lead rider signals a halt 50 yards from her corral, studying the seemingly quiet farmstead for signs of awareness or defense. The cabin remains dark, its windows revealing no movement, its surroundings undisturbed by protective measures that would alert intruders to a prepared defender. To trained observers, the scene presents the perfect target. Isolated, vulnerable, unprepared, only someone with Winchester's perception would notice the subtle alterations she has implemented throughout her property. The strategically loosened rails in the fence that would direct intruders toward specific approach routes. The carefully arranged stones that would reveal disturbance patterns invisible to untrained eyes. The altered feeding patterns that have positioned her most valuable horses in unexpected locations while leaving decoys in their usual stalls. The riders advance with coordinated precision, 2 men maintaining perimeter watch while 4 approach. The corral with ropes prepared for quick capture. Their movement patterns confirm Taabe's suspicions. These aren't opportunistic rustlers, but professionals executing a planned operation with specific targets. Their equipment, timing, and tactical approach all indicate connection to Blackwood's larger strategy rather than independent criminal activity. What they cannot know is that they are moving through a landscape that has been reading their every movement, their every decision, their every vulnerable position since they crossed onto Taabe's land. The Wind Sister hasn't just prepared defensive positions, but has transformed the entire property into an intelligence-gathering environment where every disturbance tells a story, every choice reveals information, every tactical decision provides confirmation of underlying purposes. When the intruders reach the corral, they find exactly what they expect. Valuable horses seemingly unprotected by anything more than standard fencing. What they don't realize is that the specific horses they target, the distinctive Pinto stallion and two painted mares that represent Taabe's most valuable breeding stock, are precisely the animals she anticipated they would select. Their choices confirm intelligence patterns she has been tracking through multiple information sources. "Take the painted ones and the Pinto," whispers the lead rustler, his voice carrying clearly to Taabe's position despite his attempt at silence. "Leave the others. We're not common thieves." This instruction provides final confirmation, not a general rustling operation, but targeted acquisition of specific animals. Not random criminal opportunity, but calculated strike against selected assets. Not independent action, but coordinated implementation within a larger strategy. As the men lead her horses from the corral, Taabe remains motionless in her concealed position, making no attempt to intervene directly. Her strategy extends beyond immediate defense to comprehensive intelligence gathering. Understanding this operation's connection to Blackwood's larger objectives requires observing its complete implementation rather than disrupting its initial stages. The rustlers mount up, leading Taabe's horses with professional efficiency, clearly satisfied with the operation's apparent success. They depart along a different route than their approach, a standard tactic to complicate potential pursuit. Their confidence is evident in their relaxed postures and increased pace, the hallmarks of operators who believe they've completed a successful mission without opposition. Only when they've disappeared beyond the northern ridge does Taabe move. From her observation position, her actions showing none of the panic or distress that might be expected from a victim of significant theft. Instead, she moves with purposeful efficiency, gathering minimal supplies for extended tracking while leaving no indication of pursuit that casual observers might detect. Within 15 minutes, she has vanished into the night landscape, following the rustler's trail with the focused intensity that once made Wind Sister a legend among her people. Unlike conventional trackers who would follow obvious signs, hoofprints, disturbed vegetation, directional indicators, Taabe reads the landscape at a different level entirely. The subtle compression patterns that reveal weight distribution and rider experience, the microscopic disturbances in morning dew that indicate passage timing, the almost imperceptible alterations in night insect sounds that create an auditory map of recent disturbances. The rustlers travel confidently, believing themselves beyond pursuit in the darkness, unaware that their every movement, their every tactical decision, their every casual interaction leaves information that Wind Sister absorbs like a desert absorbs rain. Their 15-minute head start means nothing against tracking skills honed through generations of survival in territories where conventional methods fail. By midnight, Taabe has confirmed her initial assessment. The rustlers aren't taking her. Horses to distant markets for anonymous sale, but to Blackwood's main camp, further evidence that this operation serves purposes beyond simple theft. The targeted selection of her most valuable breeding stock suggests specific intent rather than opportunistic crime, particularly given the precision of their identification and the tactical resources committed to their acquisition. From a concealed, Position on the ridge overlooking Blackwood's camp, Tarbay observes her horses being delivered directly to a specialized corral separated from general livestock areas. The distinctive military-style processing, immediate assessment, documentation and integration into existing stock management confirms these aren't common rustlers, but operators within Blackwood's structured organization. Most revealing is the arrival of Blackwood himself to inspect the newly acquired horses. Even at a distance, his commanding presence is unmistakable. The formal military bearing, the precise gestures that expect immediate compliance, the focused attention that evaluates assets with cold efficiency rather than appreciation. Despite the late hour, he examines each horse with methodical thoroughness, giving particular attention to the Pinto stallion, whose distinctive markings make him instantly recognizable throughout the territory. The Comanche woman values these animals beyond all others, Blackwood states to a subordinate whose clipboard and formal documentation suggest administrative authority rather than operational function. Their acquisition serves dual purposes, reducing her resources while testing response capabilities, document condition, estimated value, and integration requirements. This confirmation transforms Tarbay's tactical understanding of the rustling operation. Not mere theft, but calculated strategy, testing security, evaluating response, assessing capabilities while simultaneously reducing resources that might support resistance. The approach reveals Blackwood's professional background and methodical implementation. Systematic pressure rather than direct confrontation. Incremental acquisition rather than immediate seizure. Rather than attempting immediate recovery, which would reveal capabilities better kept hidden until more critical moments, Tarbay continues systematic intelligence gathering throughout the night. She documents camp layout, security patterns, communication systems, and command structures, each element providing crucial information for countering Blackwood's larger strategy beyond this initial incursion. Most valuable is the insight gained into Blackwood himself, not the distant figure of past trauma, but a current operational adversary whose methods reveal both capabilities and vulnerabilities. His military precision demonstrates formal training and systematic implementation. His command presence confirms authority based on competence rather than mere position. His attention to documentation reveals an adversary who operates through systems rather than impulse. Yet within these strengths, Tarbay identifies exploitable patterns. Blackwood's confidence in conventional security creates blind spots in non-traditional approaches. His reliance on hierarchical command structures establishes potential disruption points through targeted intervention. His systematic methodology creates predictability that alternative strategies can anticipate and counter. Dawn approaches as Tarbay completes her intelligence gathering, the eastern sky beginning to lighten with the first suggestions of morning. Rather than withdrawing immediately, she maintains her observation position long enough to document the camp's transition from night to day operations. The shift changes, the communication protocols, the command transitions that reveal organizational structures beyond what night observation alone would provide. Only when she has absorbed every available detail does she begin her withdrawal, moving with the ghost-like silence that earned her tracking name. Her route takes her not back toward her farm, which Blackwood's surveillance would expect, but toward Painted Creek settlement through concealment pathways that no conventional tracker could follow or detect. The community awakens to find Winsister waiting at the council fire, her presence revealing nothing of the night's extensive activities. Elder Running Fox joins her with the dignified deliberation of traditional leadership, his assessment immediately, recognizing that significant developments have occurred despite her composed exterior. Blackwood tests our strength through measured incursions, she reports without preamble, her concise assessment reflecting both traditional communication patterns and operational efficiency. 6 men took my 3 most valuable horses during the night, not as common rustlers, but as organized operators delivering assets directly to Blackwood's main camp. Rather than expressing outrage at this violation, Elder Running Fox absorbs the information with the measured evaluation of experienced leadership. He seeks to understand our response capabilities before committing to larger operations, and to reduce resources that might support resistance, Taabe confirms. The pattern suggests systematic pressure rather than immediate confrontation, testing boundaries, evaluating reactions, identifying vulnerabilities before implementing primary objectives. As community members gather around the council fire, Taabe provides detailed briefing on Blackwood's operation: camp structure, personnel, numbers, equipment capabilities, security patterns, command organization. Her precise documentation, completed during night observation under minimal visibility conditions, demonstrates tracking skills that transcend conventional capabilities. Miguel Two Ravens, who has emerged as the most promising student of Taabe's tracking instruction, studies her terrain sketches with focused attention. You mapped their entire security rotation from one night's observation. Security patterns reveal organizational structure, Taab explains, her teaching methods integrating traditional knowledge with tactical application. Night operations demonstrate preparation levels and personnel quality more accurately than daytime activities. Command transitions identify decision points within hierarchical systems. This exchange represents not merely information sharing, but capability development, transferring generations of tracking wisdom into contemporary application against modern threats. Unlike conventional military instruction focused on weapon systems and direct confrontation, Winsisters' approach emphasizes understanding adversaries through environmental interaction, identifying patterns invisible to untrained observation, exploiting informational advantages rather than material resources. The council discussion shifts from assessment to response, tactical options varying between traditional perspectives and contemporary adaptations. Some advocate immediate recovery operations to retrieve stolen property and demonstrate defensive capabilities. Others suggest territorial authorities should be notified despite previous failures to provide justice or protection. Still others recommend accelerated relocation of vulnerable community members to more defensible positions. Taabe listens to these perspectives with respectful attention while developing more comprehensive strategic assessment. Blackwood's operation reflects professional implementation beyond what community resources could directly counter through conventional opposition. His systematic approach, government connections, and substantial resources create overwhelming advantages in traditional confrontation metrics. Yet within these apparent strengths, Taabe identifies structural vulnerabilities that specialized capabilities might exploit. Blackwood's operation depends on predictable supply lines through difficult territory. His personnel, while professionally trained, lack indigenous knowledge of landscape features invisible to conventional observation. His hierarchical command structure requires consistent communication that alternative methods might disrupt or manipulate. Blackwood expects predictable responses based on conventional patterns, she observes, when the council discussion reaches natural transition point. Direct confrontation would confirm his tactical assessments, while revealing defensive capabilities better kept hidden until more advantageous moments. Strategic response requires understanding his operational requirements rather than reacting to his visible actions. This perspective shifts the council's approach from immediate countermeasures to systematic strategy development, not merely responding to rustling incidents, but understanding their place within Blackwood's larger objectives. not focusing on property recovery, but on intelligence gathering that reveals exploitable patterns within seemingly overwhelming opposition. "What do you propose, Winsister?" Elder Running Fox asks, the question acknowledging both her tactical expertise and the community's trust in her assessment. "Blackwood believes he faces scattered individuals with minimal coordination," Tabe responds, her quiet voice drawing listeners into focused attention. "His strategy depends on isolating targets, applying systematic pressure, and exploiting divisions between resistance points. Effective counter-strategy requires connection rather than separation, information rather than confrontation, patience rather than immediate response." As the council meeting transitions to specific planning, Tabe's approach integrates traditional knowledge with contemporary application, utilizing ancient tracking wisdom against modern opposition, applying generational survival strategies to current territorial threats. Unlike direct military resistance, which would match Blackwood's strengths against community vulnerabilities, her approach leverages specialized capabilities against systematic weaknesses. The resulting strategy emerges not as conventional defense, a plan, but as integrated system combining surveillance networks, communication methods invisible to traditional monitoring, and coordinated intelligence gathering that transforms apparent vulnerability into informational advantage. Rather than fortifying isolated positions, the community establishes connected response capabilities that utilize landscape knowledge beyond what Blackwood's operators could anticipate or counter. Miguel Two Ravens, who will coordinate the youth surveillance network, summarizes this approach with perceptive clarity. "We don't fight the bear directly. We become the shadow the bear cannot see, the sound the bear cannot hear, the presence the bear cannot detect until it finds itself surrounded by what it believed it was hunting." This strategic vision reflects Winsister's profound influence, not merely tracking techniques, but fundamental reframing of opposition concepts, not victims defending limited resources, but hunters utilizing specialized knowledge, not isolated targets, but connected network with shared capabilities, not reactive defense, but proactive engagement that controls operational initiative despite material disadvantages. As Council disperses with clear implementation responsibilities, Taabe prepares for difficult task ahead, returning to her farm, where Blackwood's surveillance would expect emotional distress from significant theft, maintaining convincing performance of limited awareness while actually coordinating comprehensive counter-strategy through methods invisible to conventional monitoring. The morning sun illuminates her path as she departs. Painted Creek, through concealment routes that bypass Blackwood's observation posts. Unlike conventional movement focused on destination efficiency, Winsister's travel integrates continuous intelligence gathering with precise implementation timing. Each arroyo crossing provides surveillance opportunity. Each ridge approach offers monitoring position. Each water source reveals recent activity patterns through disturbances invisible to untrained observation. By mid-morning, Tabe approaches, her farm with the appropriate visible distress of someone discovering significant theft. Her performance for watching eyes demonstrates convincing progression from initial confusion through growing awareness to emotional response. Nothing in her movements or reactions reveals her complete knowledge of the rustling operation, her night tracking of the stolen horses, or her strategic coordination with community defense networks. To Blackwood's watchers, still maintaining surveillance from concealed positions around her property, her activities present exactly the expected pattern. A solitary woman with limited resources facing systematic pressure beyond her capability to resist. Her apparent vulnerability, isolation, and emotional distress all confirm tactical assessments that would guide further encroachment operations. What these observers cannot detect is Wind Sisters' comprehensive counterintelligence implementation occurring beneath visible activities. While appearing to focus on remaining farm tasks with the resigned determination of someone facing overwhelming opposition, Tabe actually establishes sophisticated monitoring systems throughout her property, coordinates movement timing with community surveillance networks, and prepares specialized response capabilities against anticipated escalation patterns. The hunters believe they watch helpless prey. They cannot know they observe a predator measuring their every vulnerability. Blackwood's water diversion operation begins 3 days after the rustling incident, precisely when Tabe predicted it would. Before dawn, 20 men with specialized equipment move into position around the narrow canyon where the underground spring surfaces, establishing control points at strategic locations along the watercourse that feeds both Painted Creek settlement and surrounding farms. The operation shows professional implementation, specialized equipment transported under cover of darkness, security teams positioned before engineering crews, communication systems established between operational sections, yet nothing about. This supposedly covert operation escapes Wind Sisters' surveillance network. Miguel Two Ravens observes the initial equipment movement from a concealed position so well integrated with the landscape that Blackwood's security teams pass within 15 feet without detecting his presence. Young Swifthawk monitors personnel, deployment patterns using traditional observation methods that leave no trace for conventional security to discover. Sarah Colton, moving openly along public routes with the legitimate purpose of collecting botanical specimens, documents official authorization papers visible on equipment crates. Each intelligence element flows through communication channels, beyond what Blackwood's monitoring could detect, patterns of smoke signals that appear identical to morning cooking fires, hunting calls that sound like natural wildlife, message carriers using ancient travel routes invisible to those without. Generational knowledge of the territory. By mid-morning, Tabe has comprehensive understanding of the operation's scope, capabilities and vulnerabilities, despite never leaving her farm where Blackwood's surveillance continues, recording her apparently routine activities. The diversion structure itself reveals Blackwood's ultimate intentions more clearly than any intelligence report could. The engineering design doesn't simply redirect water for construction purposes, but establishes permanent control infrastructure, concrete, foundation footings, steel reinforcement frameworks, heavy machinery positioning for long-term operational capacity. This isn't temporary resource utilization, but permanent appropriation, not just railway construction support, but fundamental territorial acquisition through water control. He's damming the entire watershed, Calvin Trueshield reports during the Emergency Council gathering at Painted Creek. Not just diverting flow for construction needs, but establishing permanent control infrastructure. Their engineering team is installing foundation systems designed for decades of operation, not temporary project support. Elder Running Fox absorbs this assessment with the grave understanding of someone who has witnessed generations of incremental dispossession. Without water access, our legal land titles become meaningless. Papers that supposedly protect our territory are worthless if the resources that make it habitable are controlled by others. The Territorial Water Commission approved the project. Yesterday, Sarah Colton adds, her position as school teacher in Meridian Crossing, providing access to government communications invisible to Indigenous community members. Judge Harmon signed the authorization without public hearing or community notification. The paperwork was processed through a special administrative session closed to public observation. This confirmation of government complicity transforms the tactical situation from resource dispute to existential threat, not just challenging community assets, but undermining foundational survival requirements. Without water access, the legal land rights secured through years of careful navigation of territorial systems become hollow protection of uninhabitable territory. Yet amid this sobering assessment, Tabe identifies the operational vulnerability that specialized capabilities might exploit. Blackwood's water diversion depends on physical infrastructure vulnerable to environmental conditions he cannot fully control. His engineering implementation requires stable construction conditions that specialized knowledge might disrupt. His security operations focus on conventional approaches visible to traditional monitoring rather than indigenous methods invisible to standard surveillance. Blackwood controls the visible waterways, she observes, her quiet voice drawing listeners into focused attention. But not the underground springs that feed them. His engineers understand surface water management, but not the subterranean systems our ancestors mapped through generations of territorial knowledge. This perspective shifts the Council's understanding from apparent defeat to potential advantage. Not opposing Blackwood's overwhelming resources directly, but utilizing specialized knowledge he cannot access or counter. Not fighting for visible water control, but activating alternative sources invisible to conventional assessment. Not reacting to crisis, but implementing prepared contingencies developed through generations of survival experience. The resulting response strategy emerges, not as desperate resistance, but as coordinated implementation, combining traditional knowledge with contemporary application. While maintaining appearance of crisis response to preserve tactical surprise, the community activates water management systems developed through centuries of drought survival. Ancient wells concealed from outside observation are reopened using methods that leave no visible evidence of activity. Underground water channels documented through generational mapping are cleared using techniques invisible to surface monitoring. Alternative springs beyond Blackwood's operational awareness are prepared for community access through routes that bypass his security perimeters. Miguel Two Ravens, whose exceptional tracking abilities have made him Wind Sister's most promising student, summarizes this approach with perceptive clarity. Blackwood believes water flows only where his engineers can see it. Our advantage lives in what remains invisible to those who read only surface patterns without understanding the deeper systems beneath them. As implementation begins, Taabe faces her most challenging operational requirement: maintaining convincing performance of crisis impact while actually coordinating comprehensive counter-strategy. Her farm's location directly downstream from Blackwood's diversion operation makes her water access among the first affected by his engineering implementation. His surveillance teams monitor her activities with heightened attention, documenting her apparent struggle against resource deprivation their operation has deliberately created. The performance she delivers for watching eyes demonstrates masterful counterintelligence implementation. Her visible activities show convincing progression from initial confusion through growing awareness to strategic adaptation. Her water conservation methods appear as desperate measures rather than prepared implementation. Her crop and livestock management demonstrates apparent compromise rather than alternative supply utilization. Nothing in her observable behavior reveals her complete understanding of Blackwood's operation or her central role in coordinating community response strategy. To maintain this deception, Tabe must endure genuine hardship rather than merely simulating its effects. The visible water sources on her property, the surface creek, the primary well, the storage tanks that support daily operations, genuinely diminish under Blackwood's diversion activities. The gardens nearest to her farmhouse show actual stress rather than theatrical representation. The livestock in visible pastures experience authentic water restriction rather than staged deprivation. This commitment to operational authenticity represents Wind Sister's extraordinary discipline, accepting actual hardship to maintain deception integrity rather than compromising tactical effectiveness through performance inconsistencies. Understanding that Blackwood's assessment includes detailed documentation of stress indicators beyond what simple acting could simulate, she endures genuine difficulties while implementing alternative solutions through methods invisible to conventional surveillance. 5 days into the water diversion operation, Wilson returns to Tubbs' farm. Unlike his previous visit with multiple riders maintaining tactical positioning, he arrives alone with the calculated approach of someone offering assistance rather than threat. His expensive horse, immaculate clothing, and practiced expression of concern all contribute to the performance of legitimate business representative rather than acquisition operative. "Mrs. Nashoba," he greets with professionally calibrated sympathy, "I've just come from upstream and observed the unfortunate water situation affecting your property. A regrettable development, particularly given your admirable self-sufficiency. Operation here." Tabe acknowledges his presence with appropriate wariness, while revealing nothing of her comprehensive understanding of his actual function within Blackwood's operation. Her response, minimal, guarded, but not overtly hostile, creates space for his prepared approach while providing no information beyond what his surveillance already possesses. "Colonel Blackwood has authorized me to present a revised acquisition offer," Wilson continues, producing official-looking documents with corporate letterhead and legal formatting. "Given the changed circumstances affecting water availability to this property, he's prepared to offer significantly higher compensation than market rates would typically indicate, a gesture of community responsibility despite developmental necessities." The offer amount, nearly triple the territory's standard valuation for comparable properties, reveals Blackwood's accelerated timeline rather than genuine generosity. The preparedness of formal documentation, complete with territorial approval, stamps and legal certifications, demonstrates pre-arranged government complicity rather than responsive accommodation. The specifically tailored terms addressing Tabe's particular situation indicate targeted acquisition rather than general purchasing. Program. The Territorial Water Commission has unfortunately approved permanent diversion infrastructure for the railway development project, Wilson explains with practiced regret that disguises satisfaction. While legal appeals remain theoretically possible, practical water access to this property will not be restored. Colonel Blackwood's offer represents rare opportunity to receive substantial compensation for land that has diminished in practical utility. This combination of implied threat, bureaucratic inevitability, and financial inducement represents classic displacement tactics refined through decades of territorial acquisition operations. The approach depends on target isolation, resource deprivation, and apparent legitimacy, creating conditions where surrender seems rational while resistance appears futile. What Wilson cannot recognize through his professional assessment is that the woman evaluating his proposal is not the vulnerable target his intelligence has identified, but Wind's sister, measuring his tactical approach for exploitable patterns. Behind her carefully composed expression of concerned evaluation, Tabe catalogues every element of his presentation: document formatting indicating preparation timeline, approval stamps revealing authorization protocols, specific language choices, demonstrating coordination between corporate interests and government authorities. "I'll need time to consider such an important decision," she responds with convincing uncertainty that reveals nothing of her actual strategic assessment. "This has been my home for many years. Such changes require careful thought." Wilson accepts this reasonable hesitation with professional patience that masks operational timeline awareness. Of course, Colonel Blackwood understands significant decisions require appropriate consideration. He's authorized me to leave these documents for your review and return in 3 days for your response. This specific time frame provides crucial confirmation of Blackwood's operational schedule, not arbitrary negotiation timing, but coordinated implementation sequencing. The 3-day deadline aligns precisely with intelligence from other sources indicating accelerated construction preparations, governmental approval processing, and resource acquisition operations throughout the territory. After Wilson departs, Taabe maintains her observable routines with methodical consistency, while actually conducting comprehensive document analysis beyond what conventional surveillance could detect. The acquisition papers, seemingly standard territorial transaction forms, contain subtle irregularities that reveal crucial operational information, approval dates preceding public announcement, authorization signatures from officials without jurisdictional authority, implementation schedules corresponding with military-style operational timelines rather than standard construction sequencing. Most significant is the property description contained within the technical specifications. Not just Taabe's farm, but surrounding territories, including watershed areas, geological formations, and access corridors that correspond precisely with the railway route planning documents Miguel had observed in Blackwood's main camp. The comprehensive scope confirms this isn't merely individual property acquisition, but systematic territorial control implementation, not just purchasing land, but securing complete infrastructural dominance throughout the region. That evening, as darkness provides concealment from Blackwood's surveillance, Taabe slips away from her farm through ancient travel routes invisible to conventional tracking. Her journey to Painted Creek follows water paths beneath the surface, utilizing cave systems and underground channels documented through generations of indigenous knowledge, but absent from any territorial survey or government mapping. These subterranean routes, developed through centuries of both ceremonial practice and practical necessity, provide movement capabilities beyond what Blackwood's security operations could monitor or intercept. The council meeting she joins operates by firelight in the ceremonial center of the settlement. Community leaders gathered to integrate intelligence from multiple sources into comprehensive response strategy. Unlike conventional crisis meetings focused on immediate threat reaction, this gathering demonstrates systematic implementation of prepared contingencies, not panic-driven improvisation, but measured activation of generational survival knowledge. Adapted to current circumstances, Taabe presents Wilson's acquisition documents alongside her detailed analysis, the combined intelligence transforming separate information elements into integrated operational understanding. Blackwood's timeline has accelerated beyond initial assessment, she explains, connecting document details with intelligence from other sources. The acquisition offers water diversion implementation, and railway construction preparation all indicate coordinated operation with government authorization already secured through non-standard procedures. Rather than generating despair, this assessment clarifies response requirements and implementation timing. Elder Running Fox, whose leadership combines traditional wisdom with adaptive strategic thinking, identifies the operational implication others might miss. Acceleration indicates vulnerability rather than strength. Blackwood commits resources before securing complete control because external factors pressure his timeline beyond optimal preparation. This insight shifts tactical understanding from apparent disadvantage to potential opportunity, not evidence of overwhelming opposition, but indication of operational compromise forced by implementation constraints. Blackwood's accelerated schedule, while creating immediate pressure on community resources, also creates strategic vulnerabilities that specialized capabilities might exploit if properly coordinated and precisely implemented. The resulting response. Strategy emerges through collaborative development rather than hierarchical direction, each community member contributing specialized knowledge within integrated framework. Calvin Trueshield provides legal analysis, identifying procedural vulnerabilities in territorial approvals. Morning Light offers traditional water wisdom, documenting alternative sources beyond Blackwood's awareness. Miguel Two Ravens reports security pattern analysis revealing surveillance gaps and response limitations. Sarah Colton contributes insider information about Railway Commission scheduling and financial commitment timelines. Throughout this strategic development, Taabe's unique contribution extends beyond specific tactical elements to fundamental approach, philosophy, not just identifying what actions to take, but how to implement them within comprehensive understanding of adversary operations. Her tracking wisdom, developed through generations of survival knowledge, transforms apparent vulnerability into operational advantage by utilizing Blackwood's assumptions against his objectives. Blackwood believes he controls territory by controlling its visible resources, she observes, her quiet voice carrying that distinctive quality that draws listeners into deeper understanding. His power depends on our acceptance of his definition of essential requirements. We survive not by challenging his strength directly, but by redefining what sustains us beyond his awareness or comprehension. As planning transitions to specific implementation assignments, the community demonstrates resilience beyond what conventional assessment would recognize or anticipate. Unlike resistance movements organized around oppositional identity, their response integrates cultural wisdom with practical adaptation. Not just fighting against external threat, but activating internal capabilities that transform survival. Requirements into specialized advantages. Dawn approaches as the Council concludes, implementation responsibilities distributed throughout community networks, extending beyond Painted Creek to isolated farms, allied settlements, and supportive contacts in territorial outposts. Taabe prepares for her return journey through underground water routes, carrying not just strategic decisions, but renewed connection to collective purpose beyond individual survival. The eastern sky lightens with approach of morning as she emerges from concealed travel paths near her farm. Unlike conventional movement concerned primarily with destination efficiency, her return integrates continuous intelligence gathering with precise timing calibration. Each arroyo crossing provides surveillance opportunity. Each ridge approach offers monitoring position. Each downstream observation point reveals operational patterns through water flow disruptions invisible to untrained assessment. By the time she approaches her farm, where Blackwood's surveillance continues documenting apparent resource deprivation effects, Taabe has absorbed comprehensive understanding of territorial conditions beyond her immediate property. The integrated intelligence confirms strategic assessment while revealing specific implementation requirements, not just what must be done, but how it must be coordinated within environmental conditions Blackwood cannot control or counter. To watching eyes, her return presents convincing appearance of someone accepting inevitable displacement through gradual surrender to overwhelming circumstances. Her movements demonstrate appropriate fatigue from water-carrying activities necessitated by diverted creek flow. Her garden maintenance shows reasonable compromise between conservation and necessity. Her livestock management reflects prioritization decisions consistent with resource limitation impacts. What these observers cannot detect is Wind Sister's tactical implementation occurring beneath visible activities. Coordination signals disguised as routine tasks, preparation activities concealed within necessary farm operations, strategic timing calibration masked by apparent daily rhythm adjustments. The performance maintains perfect consistency with expected behavior patterns, while actually establishing operational foundation for coordinated response beyond what Blackwood's assessment could anticipate or counter. 3 days after Wilson's visit, as summer heat intensifies water deprivation impacts throughout the territory, Blackwood's operation faces unexpected challenge from directions his strategic assessment never considered, and through methods his security operations cannot detect. The hunters, who believed they controlled the territory's essential resources, discover that the prey they thought vulnerable has become the predator they never saw coming. Wind, Sisters Hunt enters its decisive phase. Wilson's return to Tarbes. Farm coincides with the hottest day of summer, heat shimmering across the plains in waves that distort vision and challenge endurance. The timing is deliberate. Environmental pressure reinforcing resource deprivation, physical discomfort, amplifying psychological vulnerability. He arrives precisely at noon, when shade becomes precious commodity and water scarcity most acutely felt, his immaculate appearance designed to emphasize contrast between his comfortable position and her apparent desperation. Mrs. Nashoba, he greets with practiced concern that masks satisfaction. "I trust you've had sufficient time to review Colonel Blackwood's generous offer. Given the deteriorating conditions, I'm authorized to expedite payment processes for your convenience." Tarbes stands in her doorway, her posture and expression calibrated to present exactly what Wilson expects to see. A woman weakened by resource deprivation, isolated from support networks, facing inevitable displacement through forces beyond her control. Her visible property shows undeniable stress signs: gardens wilting under water restriction, livestock reduced to essential breeding stock, storage containers empty of reserves that would sustain extended resistance. "I have questions about the offer terms," she responds, her voice carrying appropriate strain while revealing nothing of her actual strategic positioning. The documents Wilson had left contained deliberate technical complexities designed to overwhelm individual comprehension, creating dependency on his interpretation rather than independent assessment. "Of course," Wilson agrees with professional patience that disguises operational urgency. "I'd be happy to clarify any concerns. Colonel Blackwood wants to ensure complete understanding and satisfaction with the transaction process." The negotiation that follows demonstrates Tarbes' masterful counterintelligence implementation. She presents convincing confusion about specific contractual clauses, requiring detailed explanations that reveal underlying legal frameworks and procedural requirements. She expresses appropriate hesitation about property valuation methods, prompting elaboration that confirms financial processing sequences and documentation timing. She raises reasonable concerns about relocation logistics, necessitating clarification that exposes operational scheduling and resource allocation priorities. Throughout this exchange, Wilson believes he manages a standard acquisition negotiation, with vulnerable seller requiring additional reassurance before inevitable agreement. What he cannot recognize through professional assessment is that each question, each hesitation, each concern extracts specific intelligence value beyond its apparent purpose, not just clarifying contractual terms, but documenting operational parameters, not merely addressing property valuation, but confirming financial processing procedures, not simply discussing relocation logistics, but mapping implementation sequences. 3 days, Taabe finally states, presenting the apparent surrender Wilson has anticipated while establishing the timing parameter most crucial to coordinated response strategy. "I need 3 days to organize my belongings and prepare for departure." Wilson accepts this reasonable request with visible relief that reveals operational timeline pressure. Colonel Blackwood will be pleased to accommodate such a reasonable time frame. I'll return with payment authorization and transportation assistance on the morning of the third day. The specific scheduling. Morning arrival rather than flexible. Timing provides final confirmation of coordinated operations beyond individual property acquisition. Blackwood's accelerated implementation requires synchronized scheduling across multiple operational components, creating dependency relationships between acquisition sequences, resource allocation timing, and construction implementation that specialized disruption might exploit if precisely targeted and properly coordinated. After Wilson departs, Taabe maintains her performance of reluctant surrender for watching surveillance, her visible activities demonstrating appropriate preparation for imminent departure while revealing nothing of her actual strategic implementation. She sorts personal belongings with convincing emotional attachment to items that must be abandoned. She secures remaining livestock with practical arrangements for essential transportation. She prepares traditional farewell ceremonies appropriate for ancestral land separation. Only when darkness provides concealment does Wind Sister activate the decisive phase of response strategy developed through collaborative planning and implemented through coordinated community networks. Unlike conventional resistance focused on direct opposition to superior resources, her approach targets systemic vulnerabilities within Blackwood's operational structure, not attempting to match his strength but exploiting dependencies his. Accelerated timeline has necessarily created the integration of traditional knowledge with contemporary application, transforms apparent disadvantage into specialized capability. Ancient water wisdom identifies subterranean pressure points where minimal disruption creates maximum impact on surface flow systems. Generational tracking skills pinpoint vulnerabilities in supply routes where targeted intervention compromises multiple operational components simultaneously. Indigenous communication methods coordinate synchronized actions across distributed networks, operating beyond conventional monitoring capabilities. By midnight, implementation begins with precision timing calibrated to environmental conditions. Blackwood cannot control an operational sequences. He cannot adjust without compromising essential objectives. Miguel 2 Ravens leads a specialized team targeting critical equipment vulnerabilities using traditional methods that leave no evidence of deliberate intervention, not sabotage in conventional sense, but systemic disruption disguised as environmental. Complications. Morning light coordinates water flow adjustments through subterranean channels that alter surface conditions without revealing human activation. Calvin Trueshield implements legal intervention sequences synchronized with physical operations, creating procedural complications at precise moments when administrative flexibility would be most critical to Blackwood's accelerated timeline. Throughout this coordinated implementation, Taabe herself undertakes the most challenging operational component, direct infiltration of Blackwood's main camp to recover her stolen horses. Unlike the community-based disruption activities occurring simultaneously across the territory, this mission requires Wind Sister's singular tracking capabilities and specialized infiltration skills beyond what even her most promising students have developed. Her approach demonstrates tracking wisdom refined beyond conventional understanding or contemporary counterparts. She moves not through obvious access routes that security operations would naturally monitor, but through terrain features Blackwood's personnel would consider impassable. Vertical rock faces that provide handholds invisible to untrained observation. Narrow water channels that allow concealed movement beneath surface visibility. Thermal gradient transitions that defeat night vision equipment through temperature normalization rather than signature reduction. The security perimeter surrounding Blackwood's main camp represents professional implementation of military-style Protection, overlapping observation sectors, randomized patrol patterns, technical monitoring systems supplementing human surveillance. Yet these sophisticated measures address anticipated approaches based on conventional capabilities rather than specialized skills developed through generations of survival knowledge in territories where detection meant death. Wind Sister passes through these layered defenses, not by countering their strengths, but by operating in domains beyond their design parameters, not moving faster than detection capability, but becoming indistinguishable from environmental elements these systems are programmed to ignore. Not defeating surveillance through superior technology, but integrating so completely with natural patterns that observation registers only expected landscape features rather than human presence. Within the camp, she navigates security zones with precision timing calibrated to operational rhythms, identified through previous intelligence gathering. Patrol intervals, shift changes, communication sequences, and attention patterns all create momentary vulnerabilities that specialized awareness can exploit if precisely understood and properly utilized. Her movement between these transient security gaps demonstrates not just exceptional stealth, but comprehensive understanding of human behavior within structured systems, not merely avoiding detection, but anticipating reaction patterns that create predictable operational blind spots. The specialized corral containing her stolen horses occupies premium position within the camp layout, its central location and enhanced security, reflecting the animal's value within Blackwood's operational assessment. Unlike standard livestock holdings maintained primarily for utilitarian purposes, these particular horses receive treatment indicating strategic rather than practical importance. Nutritional supplements beyond basic maintenance requirements, specialized handling protocols, documentation procedures suggesting breeding program development rather than simple transportation resources. This exceptional treatment confirms Tabe's earlier assessment, not merely property theft, but strategic acquisition of biological resources with specific value beyond common understanding. The Pinto stallion in particular receives attention indicating recognition of genetic qualities invisible to conventional evaluation. Distinctive attributes developed through generations of specialized breeding knowledge that Blackwood seeks to acquire rather than simply eliminate. Wind Sister approaches the corral not through direct access routes that security would naturally monitor, but through adjacent supply storage areas considered secure by proximity rather than specific protection. Her movement utilizes structural shadows, routine noise patterns, and human attention limitations to create operational invisibility beyond what physical concealment alone could provide. Nothing in her approach triggers security responses because nothing registers as anomalous within established operational parameters, not avoiding surveillance but becoming element that surveillance expects to observe. The horses themselves present potential security vulnerability through natural response to recognized handler after prolonged separation. Conventional infiltration would face significant risk at this critical moment when normal equine behavior, nickering, movement toward familiar human, visible excitement, would immediately alert security to unauthorized presence. Wind Sister counters this vulnerability not through restraint application, but specialized communication methods developed through lifetime relationship with these particular animals. Subtle scent identification, distinctive pressure patterns, specific approach rhythms that signal required behavior beyond verbal command or physical control. With extraordinary discipline, the horses maintain appropriate calm as Tabe removes specialized containment equipment and prepares for coordinated movement. Nothing in their behavior triggers automated monitoring systems or human observation patterns because nothing deviates from expected parameters until precisely synchronized with broader operational implementation occurring simultaneously throughout. Blackwood's extended territories. The exfiltration demonstrates Winchester's comprehensive operational understanding beyond tactical movement capability. Rather than attempting immediate departure that would necessarily trigger pursuit response, she integrates the horse's liberation within systematic disruption, occurring simultaneously across multiple operational domains. Camp security finds attention, necessarily divided between equipment failures requiring immediate response, administrative complications demanding leadership engagement, supply chain disruptions affecting critical resource availability, and environmental changes impacting operational conditions beyond human control. Within this coordinated chaos, the absence of three specific horses represents minor anomaly easily attributed to containment failure rather than deliberate infiltration. Not security breach demanding comprehensive response, but logistical complication requiring practical solution. By the time systematic inventory would identify specific assets missing rather than merely displaced, Winchester and the recovered horses have moved beyond conventional pursuit capability through routes invisible to traditional tracking methods. Dawn finds Blackwood's operation facing synchronized challenges across every operational domain, not catastrophic failure of individual components, but systematic disruption of integrated functions. Water management systems experience pressure anomalies beyond engineering explanation. Equipment deployments encounter terrain complications absent from survey documentation. Administrative processes face procedural requirements unanticipated. In implementation scheduling, supply chains confront delivery complications without identifiable causation. What makes these challenges particularly devastating is their apparent disconnection from human intervention, not recognizable sabotage that security operations could counter, but environmental complications that engineering solutions must address. Not identifiable opposition that tactical responses could target, but systemic vulnerabilities that operational adjustments must accommodate. Not external attack that defensive measures could repel, but internal failures that fundamental reassessment must resolve. Colonel Harland Blackwood, whose military background and development experience have created expectation of inevitable success through superior resources and methodical implementation, confronts operational environment beyond his comprehensive understanding or effective control. His authoritarian leadership style, highly effective within hierarchical systems, addressing anticipated challenges through established procedures, finds no appropriate application against distributed complications with no identifiable source or conventional solution. Most destabilizing to Blackwood's operational confidence is the simultaneous arrival of territorial officials whose presence cannot be postponed or managed through established channels. The judicial representatives, tax assessors, and property commissioners arrive with documentation requiring immediate attention. Not routine administrative procedures, but fundamental challenges to operational authorization, resource allocation, and implementation approval that cannot be delegated to subordinates or deferred to subsequent processing. What Blackwood cannot recognize through conventional assessment is that these official interventions represent the culmination of Calvin TrueShield's legal strategy implemented through Sarah Colton's institutional networks, not direct opposition through regulatory challenge, but procedural complication through administrative requirements. Not attempting to defeat authorized development through legal prohibition, but ensuring authorized development requires administrative compliance through documented processes. Not opposing powerful interests directly, but ensuring powerful interests face bureaucratic requirements their accelerated timeline cannot accommodate without compromising essential objectives. By mid-morning, when Wilson arrives at Taab's farm with payment authorization and relocation transportation, he finds not surrendered property awaiting acquisition processing, but thriving homestead demonstrating unexpected revitalization. The gardens previously showing drought stress now display healthy resilience through innovative irrigation. The livestock previously reduced to essential breeding stock now include the distinctive Pinto stallion and painted mares supposedly secured within Blackwood's camp. The water storage systems previously depleted by diversion operations now demonstrate sufficient capacity for sustained independent function. Most disorienting to Wilson's professional assessment is Taabe herself, not displaying expected vulnerability of isolated owner facing inevitable displacement, but embodying composed confidence of someone whose position has fundamentally transformed since their previous interaction. Nothing in her appearance, demeanor, or communication reflects the desperate circumstances that acquisition strategy had deliberately created and methodically exploited. "There's been a misunderstanding," she informs him with quiet authority that stops his prepared acquisition speech before it begins. "This property is not available for purchase or acquisition under any terms or conditions, now or ever." Wilson attempts recovery through practiced negotiation techniques, his professional experience suggesting temporary complication rather than fundamental strategic failure. Mrs. Nashoba, the contractual discussion has progressed beyond preliminary interest to formal agreement parameters. Colonel Blackwood's organization has invested significant resources in developmental preparation based on acquisition scheduling commitments. "Your operational complications extend beyond this individual property," Taabe responds, her seemingly simple statement carrying implications that trigger Wilson's professional concern beyond specific acquisition failure. Colonel Blackwood might find his attention better directed toward addressing systemic challenges throughout his territorial holdings rather than focusing on transactions that will not occur under any circumstances. This reference to broader operational disruption beyond her specific property confirms Wilson's emerging suspicion. Not isolated complication affecting individual acquisition, but coordinated resistance impacting entire developmental implementation. Not negotiation difficulty requiring additional incentive, but strategic opposition, operating through methods beyond conventional assessment or standard countermeasures. As Wilson departs to report unexpected complications to increasingly beleaguered leadership, Taabe Nashoba stands at her property boundary, watching dust clouds disappear over the horizon. The expression that replaces her negotiation composure carries neither triumph nor satisfaction, but quiet acknowledgement of responsibility fulfilled and balance restored. Not victory celebration, but recognition that protection requires continuous vigilance rather than momentary achievement. 7 years of peaceful existence had temporarily separated Wind Sister from her essential purpose. Blackwood's threat had necessitated her skills reactivation and deployment against familiar patterns. In new forms, the resolution brings not conclusion, but transition, not ending threat forever, but demonstrating consequences that future encroachment must consider before targeting what she has sworn to protect. The afternoon wind carries scents from miles away as Taabe turns back toward her revitalized farm. The Pinto stallion watches her approach with the particular attention that reflects their renewed partnership beyond mere ownership. The underground spring, flowing through channels invisible to those without traditional knowledge, nourishes soil that generations of her ancestors have defended through methods evolving with changing threats but unchanging purpose. Wind Sisters Hunt has achieved its objective, not through violence that perpetuates conflict cycles, but strategic application of specialized knowledge that rebalances fundamental relationships. The Rustlers, who believed they faced merely a Comanche widow on isolated farm, have encountered instead living continuation of indigenous wisdom that transforms apparent vulnerability into unexpected strength. As Tabe Nashoba moves through evening, routines with quiet purpose that honors both traditional knowledge and contemporary application, she carries neither resentment for necessary awakening nor regret for peaceful interruption. The skills that made Wind Sister legendary remain integrated within the woman who breeds exceptional horses, maintains traditional gardens, and lives with respectful independence on lands her ancestors have protected through countless threats. Across generations, the hunters discovered too late they had themselves become prey. Those who came to take what was not theirs found instead what they had never anticipated, that some territories remain protected by guardians whose methods transcend conventional understanding, whose knowledge extends beyond visible patterns, whose determination flows from sources as deep and enduring as the hidden waters sustaining life across the ancient plains. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.